Hello, CNC creators. We got a guest today, and I forgot to bump him out and bring him in the right way. Leave the drum roll. But we will talk about Nate Woods in just a moment. First of all, I
Yeah.
want to welcome everybody to the Wednesday night CNC hangout, where we chew the fat or we ask questions. Kate and I try to answer some questions, but we got a special show tonight. One of the natural things that we like to do in CNC, a next natural step, is get into epoxy work. And Nate here, the guy at the below of the screen here, this guy is he's got an epoxy business going on, a very interesting business. And the way he presents in the CNC Entrepreneurs Facebook group, which you should join if you're not in, he shows a lot of the cool stuff that he does. But before we dive into that, first of all, I'm Garrett with IDC Woodcraft, your CNC router bit supplier. And of course, right next to me is our sister, Kate from Women Who CNC. Say hi, Kate.
Hey, y'all, what's going on? I'm so excited
And
for tonight. I don't know. I'm so excited to talk to Nate. I'm so excited to finally get all y'all's epoxy questions answered because I know y'all have been hammering me with some of them and I've been getting lots of emails about them. So I'm super pumped to have Nate here tonight to help tackle some of these incredible questions that you guys are throwing out at us. So are here to get your questions answered and let's get rocking and rolling. So
yeah,
to start
yeah,
off with our normal, we're just going to say hey to everyone right up front
yeah.
because we definitely want to keep the live stream rolling tonight because I know we're going to have lots of questions pouring in. So we just want to say hey to all of our regulars. If we see you in the live comments, we'll just try to keep, moving along with that. But hope everybody's doing really well tonight. It's a beautiful fall night here in Indiana. So um, I hope you guys are having good weather wherever you are as well.
Yeah, yeah. So tonight is going to be about epoxy. So we're going to focus on those type of questions mostly tonight and keep it in that direction. And for those of you who like to talk back and forth, which we're glad that you do, right? That's that we got the community going on. Then
Yeah.
we help each other out like we normally do. So before we dive into the questions, I've a couple things. Kate, share about what you do because the ladies need to know.
Yeah, so welcome, new friends. So I'm Kate Tucker. I run a group on Facebook called Women Who CNC. It's a fantastic safe space just for women. Sorry, gentlemen, just on Facebook. And we have a wonderful, wonderful group of ladies, everybody from brand new beginners to just starting out, all the way to people that are doing 3D modeling and building all kinds of really cool projects. We've also got some epoxy, really cool ladies that do a lot with epoxy in our groups as well. So very excited to see them. But I am also an educator, much like Garrett. So if you are interested in reaching out and doing any type of one-on-one work with me, you can find me over in Garrett's website, or you can reach directly out to me at womenwhocnc.com. But I do teach both men and women, but I just mainly am the admin on the Women Who CNC Facebook group. So,
Right. And so, just so you know, things we talk about all are linked in the description of this video. So if you're on Facebook, up above in the write up, there will be some links there. In YouTube, just below this video, just below the thumbs up button that I hope that you press, there's a little
yes,
there's a
please.
little yeah, please press the like button. There's a little sentence and then it has like the word more after it. You click that word more, that'll open the description part way and hit the word more again, and that'll open it up all the way. And there are all the links, including something that if you are interested in epoxy and learning about epoxy, you are going to want to know about. So let's kind of dive in. This is an epoxy special guest kind of thing with Nate Woods from Executive Fit. And so, Nate, say hello, and will you take a moment to share what you do, how you got into CNC and the epoxy work, and how you found your little niche in your CNC business?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, guys. This is really really, really cool. And I appreciate the opportunity to get on here and answer questions. I mean, years ago when I started this, I was actually personal training, and I was building up my gym, and I wanted to put in a deadlift platform. And I had a lot of trouble finding a company that would build me a custom deadlift platform. They were either too big and handling big facilities, corporate gyms and universities, that they weren't even going to bother with the guy who just wanted one, or the amount of money that they wanted to put a vinyl decal on some hardwood flooring was just astronomical to me. And I was like, never mind, I'll make one myself. So I made
I
one,
love it.
traced out a logo, there was the Punisher skull. I traced it out by hand, spray painted it, and that was it. Put some polyurethane on it, and it was done. And then somebody had said to me, was like, hey, you should post that on Facebook Marketplace. And I was like, well, no, it's probably not going to sell, but you gave me the idea, so I'll put it out there. And I put just that one out there just as an example platform, with the description of I'll build you a custom platform. And I couldn't keep up with the amount of orders coming in from the platforms. And then be able to also handle the clients that was personal training. So I had to start cutting off clients so that I could spend more time building platforms. And so eventually it got really, really frustrating, having UPS print me out an oversized print and then using transfer paper to trace it onto the wood, and then mask it out by hand and do all the spray painting by hand. It just got really, really absurdly long. And so that sent me kind of down the road of researching wood burning, laser engraving, CNC. I finally came to the conclusion that CNC was probably the best option for me to be able to streamline things. So I bought an Inventables X-Carve 1,000mm machine, and figured I would use it to start putting logos on the wood. And then with the evolution of that.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second, because I'm just going to show his website so you have an idea of what he makes here.
Yes.
Is that on the screen now?
That's perfect. That's a perfectly accurate picture. So that's the first question that I get a lot from people who are not in the gym scene is, what is a deadlift platform? And it's essentially a platform that absorbs the energy of dropping a barbell. So a very beneficial lift is called a deadlift, and it's essentially a barbell with plates on either side of it that you simply pick up off the floor. It's a very functional movement. It's a very powerful movement, and it's becoming much more popular nowadays. Just powerlifting in general. So that platform kind of gives people security to know that they're not going to damage their floor, damage their subfloor, particularly if they're dropping a lot of weight on it. So that's essentially what these products were for. These products that I make are for.
Okay. Those are so cool. So do you actually do the mats on the sides too, or do you just do the hardwood and the epoxy inlay? Do you build the whole platform, or?
It's the whole kit and caboodle. I mean, sometimes if somebody comes to me and they say, I already have a platform that's got wood in it that's these dimensions, can you make something to replace it? Certainly. But most times it's a full-on platform with the rubber sides and everything.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it really is. So I've seen a lot of your videos that you've posted in the CNC Entrepreneurs Facebook group, right? And so you make a lot of different platforms. These are all custom jobs, right?
Yeah. So it's all personalized for what this customer wants, right? Send me your logo. We'll put the logo on the platform. And so there's really nothing along the lines of making something, put it on the shelf and taking pictures of it, putting it on the shelf and hoping that it sells. It's all been from day one, a custom process.
Okay. So for the creators out there that are working on CNC business, maybe you're struggling a little bit. if you have watched this podcast from the beginning, this was started out as a mentoring with Kate to get her narrowed and niched into a niche, and
Yeah.
and what a niche in the case of both Kate with Women Who CNC and Nate with his barbell platforms, right? These are niches that they understand. And that just Nate, it was just by accident. He made something that he needed. He understood that there was something
Yep.
he needed, and he did a little custom work to it, and his work has exploded. He moved into CNC, and now you've gotten into epoxy. Tell us a little bit about your epoxy journey.
So my dad was actually the first person to recommend epoxy to me. And when he first suggested it, I kind of blew him off and was like, I don't think so, dude. That's kind of like weird. I don't know if I want to go down that road. Like, I figured this thing out with like lightly engraving the wood with Aura mask, peeling up, you know, what I want to painting it, and then peeling up the rest, and that being like it. And then I don't know what happened, but eventually I was like, you know what, let me like buy a 2-gallon kit of epoxy and like play with it and see what I can do. Because as orders started to come in.
Oh, I think he froze
Looks like
on
we
us.
lost his audio for a moment. So Nate's signal is not that strong.
Very tedious and difficult. So I was like, there's got to be a better way for this. And then, you know, multiple colors would be getting involved, you know, 4 or 5 colors in a logo. So it just started to go down the road of, okay, like this process has worked this far, but I don't think it's going to continue to work. I've got to do something different. And so maybe that was what opened my mind to, let me try this epoxy thing out. And it was very basic at first. It was carve, you know, if 2 colors touched each other, I can't do that logo. But if 2 colors were not touching each other, I could do that logo. And then it, you know, it hit me one day as I would carve this design, fill it with black epoxy, and the next day it was hard. And I remember looking at this logo and thinking, well, this is basically just as if I didn't carve that area. So it's like I could carve through that now because it's cured. So what if I were to take, you know, this line and make it black, and then do this line and make it red? And so ran a couple very simple samples like that to just to test it out, and it worked. And I was like, okay, how can I incorporate this with a logo? And it just, you know, next job that came in happened to have 2 or 3 colors involved, and 2 of the 3 colors were touching each other. And so it was just a very, very, very slow evolution. And I remember in the beginning, I would always address this up front with the customer. Like, this is the process that I'm going to do to recreate your logo, is I'm going to use colored epoxy. And if I feel like it might be a logo I can't do, I'm going to try it anyway. But if it doesn't work, I'll get a decal printed and clear over the decal, and you'll still have an awesome platform. But I'm going to give it a shot anyway and see if I can do it. And it's really cool because since then, there was only one job that I didn't do an epoxy inlay on since starting epoxy inlays.
Oh, wow. And
so now I've gotten to the point now, looking back at that one particular job, it's like, well, I could totally do that now. At the time, the skill wasn't there, wasn't ready for it. But yeah, that's kind of how it just kind of happened. Like, it wasn't like I want to do this thing with epoxy. I want to get into this like weightlifting platform industry. I didn't see an opportunity there until after I put out that first platform on Facebook Marketplace, and people started messaging me. And then that's when it kind of hit me, like, maybe there's a market for this. I don't know. Within the first year, I was doing a couple platforms at a Gold's Gym. So I figured if a Gold's Gym owner is calling me to do platforms, then like there's got to be other people across the country. And so it was like, the answer was always yes. Can you do this? Yes. But if it turns out to be crappy, we'll do a decal. Like, but I'm going to try it. And it was just, I'll try it. And
all right. Yeah. Okay. So you've got this business now. Is this a full-time gig for you now?
So this was not a full-time gig. This was nights and weekends for 2 years, I think.
Oh, wow.
Nights and weekends for 2 years. And through that time period, like I said in the beginning, I started to cut off personal training clients. And so that slowly happened over the course of maybe 6 months to where finally was like, I can't take any more clients on. I'm done training people. I have to focus on building these platforms. And so finally cut the last person off. A month or two after that, we ended up selling our house and moving into a bigger house that I'm currently in now. And just for a larger shop, larger house in general for the family. We outgrew our first house, you know. And so the plan was just like, let's go. Let's see where this whole CNC thing can go, right? Platforms cannot be the only thing. So there was other things that I was branching out on, you know, general CNC work just to help scale the business and pay the bills. But it wasn't a full-time gig for me until about 18 months ago. I quit my day job 18 months ago because I became the guy that I would always make fun of. And what I mean by that is at work, whenever somebody would be like a slacker or like not be able to show up on time or leave early, I would be the first one that would be like, man, like, look at this guy. Like, why do they keep him hired here? He can't get here on time. He's always leaving early. And I became that guy. And I would show up at work at like 10 o'clock in the morning and I would bust out everything that I could. And it would be like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and I'd have all of my work done. And I'd be like, see you guys, I have stuff at home to do. And I would then come back home and get in the shop and work. And it just drug on like that for so long that my boss was finally like, listen, if you need the 20 hours a week that I'm paying you, then I'll put you somewhere else in the company, but I can't keep you where you're at now. And I just took that as a sign of like, make a jump, just do it. At this point, like, just do it. And so I stepped out of the boat, and by the grace of God, I've been walking on water since.
Love it.
Full-time gig now. So creators, full-time gig is possible with your CNC equipment, right? It is. You find that niche, and it just happened for him on Marketplace. All right. Well, Nate, we've got some questions hanging out there. First, Kate, would you like to ask any questions to Nate about epoxy?
Well, yes and no on the epoxy front. I'm more curious as how you are doing some of like your really intricate logos, because I know obviously in Vectric, as many of us are, and I probably speak for several of us in asking this, when you recreate a logo, are you using Vectric or are you using another software to trace your bitmap and kind of work things out, or are you strictly working in VCarve? Like what is your process as far as working with different people's logos? Because I know a lot of logos can be very intricate and very detailed. So tell us a little bit about your process there.
So my experience there, the real quick answer is like I basically exclusively use Vectric unless I maybe need to use Adobe to help a customer create a logo from scratch, right? But if the customer already has a logo, I'm basically just in Vectric 100% of the time. And I've found that every bitmap, like auto trace feature, will like it sometimes works for inlays and sometimes doesn't, right? There's one that I did where every color was broken up by a black outline, kind of like a I'm blanking on the name of that type of design, like a cartoonish type logo. And so every color on the logo is broken up with a black line. So the vector trace option does work well with logos like that, where you have a nice sharp black line to trace. But you still then have to create, obviously, shapes for the different colors involved. But for the really intricate logos, I've tried using bitmap tracing and Fiverr to find somebody to trace it for me. And I've just found that like the best thing that you can do is just learn Vectric and get really proficient with just drawing lines. Like,
amen, brother.
Like there's definitely situations where like if I had there's definitely situations where like paying a designer works. There's definitely situations where using the bitmap trace feature works. But I think at the end of the day, you gotta learn Vectric because I would rather sit down and spend 3 hours getting a file ready for me to do an inlay myself over spending 3 hours searching for somebody to do it for me, or spending an hour searching for somebody to do it for me and then it not be the way that I needed it and have to find somebody else, or that now you have wasted time. Just sometimes it's better to just head first do it yourself.
Okay. Yeah.
That
So,
we
yeah.
preach that every single week, Nate. Just you have to learn Vectric. Last week I said it out loud. I said, if you do not learn how to use Vectric appropriately, these machines are just large paperweights. That's all you've got. You have to take the time and invest in the knowledge. And I love hearing that you're using Vectric in the bitmap and that you're advocating to really learn the software, because I feel like even when you have really good logos and really clean lines, there's still going to be where you maybe need to use the curve fit tool, or you need to, adjust some arcs or adjust some nodes to make sure that things are nice and smooth, but you're still maintaining the integrity of the design. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these machines only do what we tell them to do. So if you have this much knowledge of Vectric, then, your machine is going to have this much capability. But if you have this much knowledge of Vectric, then your machine is going to have this much capability. I mean,
yes,
people might disagree with that, but that's how I feel about it. And
you're spot on.
This
by
is
no
exactly.
means am I a
That's
Vectric
exactly what
wizard.
I say every time. We preach this. This is why we say you've invested in your machine, you're buying your tools, you invested in other stuff to get your shop set up, you bought the software. Now take the time to learn the software. And that's why we say go take Kyle's course. It's the only course that's out there that literally walks you through every tool that's in
Really?
Vectric from the beginning. And that
Yep.
Kyle's course is linked in the description. So if you're a Vectric user and you're trying to do it on your own and just doing I can figure it out without instructions like us guys do, right? It doesn't work that way when it comes to software. So
Nope.
I suggest you take a look at that if you haven't done it before. We've got Julian has marked out 17 questions, so we got to start
Oh
popping
boy.
into these questions
Right
here.
on.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the non-epoxy questions, we're going to buzz through them really quick because this is an epoxy time. And so let's go, Kate.
All right, so we've got John K. Can you talk about setting up a round over bit? I'm wanting to round over both sides of a tray border. I have to watch later, unable to watch live.
Okay, so the question, I will answer this question real quick when you watch later, John. For those of you who want to use round over bits, those are the ones that leave the nice little rounded edge on your bits, on your projects. I did a pizza peel video, how to make a pizza peel, and I explained about round over bits in that video and how to set them up. One thing I want to say that IDC provides is the pointed round over bits. If you're looking at one and you see a flat on the bottom of the round over bit, then you have to know how to offset the tool. That takes a little bit more thinking. So
Yep.
go watch the pizza peel video. Julian, please make note of that so we can add that to the description of the video. Okay, so RB works.
All right. Hey, brother. He says he has a question about G-Sender. Is it possible to change at the rate of travel for the 4 corner buttons? A little fast for me at this time until I get used to them. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. G-Sender, I can pop that in real quick just to show you. You can change the rate of travel in G-Sender. I got to open up G-Sender first, which I have open. G-Sender, for those of you who don't know, is control software for your CNC router. If you have an Arduino-based CNC router, like long mill, millwright, what have you. So that question, can you see the screen?
Yes.
You can change your speeds by these underneath, right in the middle. It says jog control, and here's your jog buttons. There are 3 buttons at the right. You can press the rapid, normal, and precise button. That'll change your speed. And if you want to adjust them more, you can change them in the little white boxes down below. And that is how you change your speeds in G-Sender. All right, let's go on, Richard.
All right. Hey, Richard. Hey, sir. Welcome back. All right. He says, must I use the same brand of A and B epoxy, or can different brands be mixed together? What's the difference between one versus 1v1, 1v2, or the 1 and 3 mixing?
So
So,
he's talking about ratios there.
yeah. Yeah.
1 to 1, 1 to 2, 1 to 3. Okay, there you go.
So
Nate?
I'll start off the
Nate?
question with, I don't personally mix brands. That's just not something that I would ever recommend. Nate might have a different perspective, so I'm going to let him kind of take over the rest of this question.
I would say on mixing different brands of A and B, if you want to do it as a test for the rest of us, go for it. But I have never done that. The only time I would do that is to just see what happens. I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Run. If you're going to do it, test first.
Yeah, exactly.
Remember, these are chemicals that are made by companies, and company A may have a completely different chemical reactive compound than company B. And then what about the ratio mixing?
So the ratio is usually tabletop epoxies, like 1 to 1. You'll see 1 to 1, or sometimes I know Epodex is 1 to 2, or 2 to 1. What that essentially means is like if this popsicle stick is epoxy and the ratio is 1 to 1, and this popsicle stick is hardener, it's 1 part epoxy, 1 part hardener. Whether that's like 100 ounces of epoxy and 100 ounces of hardener, or 2 ounces of epoxy and 2 ounces of hardener. You match ratio, 1 part this, 1 part this. So if you're doing 100 gallons of epoxy, it would be 100 gallons of hardener on a 1 to 1 ratio. At a 2 to 1 ratio, you would have 2 units of epoxy per 1 unit of hardener, and the unit scales. So if you're doing 50 ounces of epoxy, you would do 25 ounces of hardener on a 2 to 1 ratio. I'm not going to try and do the math with real numbers for 3 to 1, but it would be 3 parts epoxy, 1 part hardener, and whatever that ratio is. If you did 100 ounces, I'm not even going to try. I'm not good at math. But most mixing cups that have not only have the ounces on it, but they also have little ratios for 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 6 to 1, 8 to 1, different ratios on the sides of the cup. So that's what that's referring to.
What's the difference? He's asking what's the difference between the mixing. I mean, can you take epoxy and the 2 parts, and so you mix the ratio 1 to 1, but can you take the same one and go 1 to 2, and then what's the difference? What's going to happen?
I would probably venture to say it won't cure right if you don't mix it the way the manufacturer's recommended. So like certain epoxy is formulated, like you said, they're these chemicals that are formulated to mix with the hardener of that same brand. And so this particular epoxy is formulated to mix with the hardener of the same brand at a 2 to 1 ratio, and you try and mix this epoxy with a different hardener that's supposed to go 1 to 1, it may not cure. It may heat up really fast. I don't know. I've never done that, but the ratios really are just based on what the manufacturer makes. I've noticed that epoxies that are 2 to 1 are usually thinner than like tabletop epoxies that are 1 to 1. I'll also say that I'm not like an epoxy connoisseur. Like I've not used every epoxy that there is on the market. So there may be a 1 to 1 ratio epoxy that's like really thin. I just haven't used it.
Yeah. So when you're saying tabletop epoxy, that's the epoxy that gets poured on really thick on top of tables, right?
Right. Right on. Yes. Yep.
Very cool. Yeah. So the Yard Sale LLC, this is Harold, our CNC brother, Harold.
Yeah, he says, well, you most likely would talk about this, but how deep should an epoxy inlay be cut?
Good question.
That is a good question. It needs to be as deep as it needs to be. So I'll say this. I typically stay in the range of 1/8 inch to 0.15 deep. when I'm clearing out
Yeah.
pockets. Even if I'm doing V carving, if I'm doing like a V carving of a large area, I'll do a flat depth of 0.15. If I'm, let's say,
Agreed.
doing like a big circle and then I'm doing elements in the circle. So let's say the big black circle and then like red, white, and blue elements inside that big black circle. What I might do in this case is cut that big circle at a 1/4 inch deep so that I can take some off of the top, or I should take some off of the top to make sure that my material is then flat and plumb before I start carving other elements into it. And so I'd carve it 1/4 inch deep so that I have room to take stuff off the top and it's not then transparent to the bottom of that pocket after I've taken material off the top.
Yeah. I
have
wholeheartedly
found,
agree with that statement. I really do, because we were talking about this. This is one of the questions we get very, very frequently is how deep do you carve your pockets? And exactly what Nate is saying is, so if you're carving, if let's say you're going to be carving multiple parts of a project, you don't want to just carve that first pocket at 1/8 of an inch down and then go back in and surface it and then try to carve and then surface it, because what's going to happen is you're just going to eventually wear down that 1/8 inch pocket and then you're going to be back at square one. So that's why he's saying to carve it down deeper, and then you can carve it into and surface it, and that way you're getting the desired result that you want.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a question for both of you. Since I have not done epoxy, what's the difference between epoxies when you're doing a thin, like a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch pour, relative to deep pours? What is it? Uh, an epoxy? Like, is it epoxy A that's only good for deep pours, and epoxy D is for your shallow pours? Talk about the deep pours versus shallow pours a little bit.
Yeah. So the deep pour epoxy is like what you'll see like on YouTube, guys making these big long river tables that are really thick and they're pouring out of 5-gallon buckets and it's like flowing real nice. Exactly. Just like that. Just like that. So that epoxy, it cures much slower than tabletop epoxy, right? It cures much slower, which allows you to pour deeper, because it might take 5 days, 7 days to fully cure. So you can pour way deeper all in one shot. You're done. You don't have to keep coming back to it. Tabletop epoxy, which is primarily what I use, you can only pour like 1/4 inch deep. I've gone like 3/8 deep, and that's like on the border of it starting to react with itself and get too hot. So if you're trying to do a 2-inch thick slab and you need to build up 2 inches of epoxy, with tabletop epoxy, you can only do 1/4 inch at a time. Come back in 3 hours, 1/4 inch at a time. Deep pour, you can just send it.
Okay, so yeah, you just brought up a good point of something I've heard. Someone mentioned that they had an epoxy fire, right? And perhaps could that be because they tried to do a far deeper pour with the wrong epoxy?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So epoxy, for all who's watching, is a chemical reaction, and chemical reactions generate heat. So you need what I'm gathering, the deep pour stuff is this much slower reaction. So the heat is still generated, but it's able to dissipate over a period of time rather than setting everything really quickly.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
I will add a couple things to that exact comment. So when you're working with deep pour epoxy, I've done several deep pours. The thing is, you can pour, I mean, some epoxies say you can pour up to like 4 inches. Like the Upstart epoxy, they say you can pour up to like 4 inches at a time, and that's actually what I bought for Garrett's table, because I really love their products. I've had great results with their products. But the thing is you really only want to pour. So this is actually going to apply to Garrett's table because he wants a little bit like almost like a stepped translucent color. So not all just one. So what I'll probably do is pour about 1.5 inches at a time, and then I will let that dry. The other thing that you want to do while you're pouring your epoxy, or while it's while you're working with this deep pours, you actually want to have a fan on. And I know I'm blowing everybody's mind right now by saying that, because you're probably thinking you're going to be blowing dust and whatever else into there. Make sure you have a nice clean fan, and make sure, you know, your shop is somewhat clean and tidy. You don't have bugs flying around in your shop, stuff like that. That's absolutely going to help. But what's going to happen with that is when the chemical reaction is heating up, that fan is actually going to help to keep things a little bit cooler. Plus, on top of that, you have to think you're going to be surfacing at least an eighth of an, or, you know, a 16th of an inch, eighth of an inch off of that. So, you know, it's okay to use a little bit of a fan. I mean, you don't want to turn it on like full blast, you know, where it's like everything's blowing, but just having some air circulating in the shop will definitely help that stay a little bit cooler. I actually have an AC unit built into my shop, so I just will have that running to help keep things moving. But if you don't have any air and you're in a garage or something, you absolutely want to have a fan or some type of air movement. And then from there on out, you can additionally pour those, you know, 1.5 to 2 inches. And then when you're making big river tables, the other thing you want to take into consideration too is, let's say, so Garrett told me he wanted his table to be 2 inches thick. So I really need to pour about 2.5 inches thick, because if there's any type of bow or torque in the table, you have to consider that you're going to be taking some of that off, either whether it's the top side or the bottom side. You're running it through a big, you know, belt sander type of equipment. By the time you get done with all of that, you may be at 2 inches. So you really have to take a lot of extra things into consideration when you're doing that. The other thing is too, is when you build your molds, if you're doing deep river tables, you want to make sure that you're actually going a little bit wider, because I mean, the mold you build, yes, everybody tries their very, very best to get you know, to 100% square. And that's what I did with this one. It's reinforced very well, but you also have to remember, a lot of people run these tables through table saws, and you're going to be squaring it up that way. So it's really important to make sure that you're factoring A through Z when you're working with epoxy. It's not as easy as everybody makes it look on YouTube, on Instagram. You know, they just have this big beautiful wood and it just goes in there all nice and pretty, and then it pours and you're like, ta-da! It's really like blood, sweat, and tears in the background.
That's so accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, it
That's
really
it.
is.
Okay. Just so you know, we're up to 29 questions right now.
Oh gosh. Okay. Okay,
So
so let's knock out the next question.
yeah, so this is Julie. And Julie, if you are not in Women Who CNC Facebook group, make sure you sign up to Kate's group. It's a women's only CNC group. So you find that on Facebook. Just search Women Who CNC. All right, Kate,
Yeah.
take it away.
All right. Hello from Todd and Julie Frank from Goodyear, Arizona. Todd, Tom, and Julie were actually the ones that completed their first carve last week, so we did a little happy dance for them last week.
Oh,
Right
okay,
on.
that's right. I thought I recognized her name. After I said that, I was like, wait a minute, I know that name. I know that name.
Sometimes you just
Right
gotta say it out
on.
loud or jog your memory. All right. She's asking, could you please discuss the proper way to fill knot holes and or cracks in wood? We have some 2-inch thick rough cut rosewood. So Nate, why don't you take this one over?
That's
Nice
good.
one.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is the proper way, but this is just the way that I've done it. 3M, I think it's 3M, makes a foil tape that's super, super sticky. So what I've done in the past is I'll take that foil tape. I think it's typically used for like ductwork. I'll sand the bottom of, let's just say this is a live edge slab, right? And there's a knot and cracks. So I'll sand the bottom so it's nice and smooth, and then I'll take that foil tape and slap it on the bottom. And because it's so sticky and sticks so well, it has never failed me in preventing the epoxy from like bleeding out. So cracks have always been, so that's what I would do for the bottom side of it. And then obviously you'd pour your epoxy in the top and let it cure. Depending on the thickness, obviously this is 2-inch thick. So if you use tabletop or quick curing epoxy, you kind of got to use your best judgment with how much cubic inches or how much epoxy is going into it, and is that amount that's going into that knot going to react? So what I've always done is honestly just guessed at it. Like I will look at a knot and be like, I think this is going to be too big for tabletop, so I got to use deep pour, or I got to do halfway with tabletop, and then the second half in another pour. But essentially, that would be my process: is sanding the bottom, putting that foil tape on the bottom to prevent any bleed out, and then just filling it from the top. Yup, that's it right there. And then for filling cracks,
I'll put a link for this. I'll put a link for this in the comments, so it's in there right now.
Yeah. Do you ever use so what I like to do is I actually put a I do Tyvek tape, and then I put that kind of like face up, and I almost make like a double-sided tape and then put that on the bottom. Have you, because I've had a couple of issues using that tape with some leaks. Especially like the main thing, Julie and Tom, is you want to make sure you sand. So don't try to put that tape on the rough part of the live edge. Always make sure you sand it so it has a nice bond around it. The other thing you can do is add a little bit of caulk. If you just want some like an added layer of protection, you can add caulking around it and then just kind of seal it. So that'll add an extra layer of protection. But have you ever done that before?
I've never done the caulk or even the Tyvek tape. I've pretty much exclusively used the foil tape. But just like you said, if you try and put it on the rough cut.
Yeah.
Oh, we lost it for a moment.
Hopefully he'll be right back.
Yep.
But yeah, to reiterate what we were saying is you don't want to put it on the rough side of the tape. You always want to, or the rough side of the tape, listen to me. You want to put it you want to sand the wood down a little bit, and then just make sure where you're putting that tape is nice and smooth. So, because obviously tape just does not stick well to, to rough areas. But it sounds like Nate's had really good experience with the aluminum tape. So give it a whirl. I'd be interested to see, maybe try his method out again using this particular tape instead of using what I had. I probably just had a different product at the time, and it wasn't doing me the service it needed to do. So
right. Okay, cool. I'm learning so much. Nate, are you back yet? Oh, lost him. He'll have to log back in. Julian, when he comes back in, just let him in. In the meantime, I got a couple announcements I do want to share. One of the things I've noticed, people will break their router bits once in a while. And there he is, he's back. So what I have done is I've gotten with my designer to start come up with a sticker that's going to be going out now. This is full size, but that's not what the sticker is going to be. But it instructs you, it tells you what not to do with your router bits and how to properly chuck them up in your CNC router. So this will be going out with all new CNC router bits starting November. Also, everybody knows about the Beast and the Hog router bits, right? I mean, you got these badass bits right here. This one's the Beast, this one's the Hog. And I have been asked many times by people if I'd come out with a 1/8 version and a 1/2 inch version. And so I got with my tooling designer, and we've been working at it. And look at this bad boy.
Holy smokes!
That's a 1/2 inch Hog Beast. They did get they didn't read my dimension requirements right, but that's okay. I got something to test out. So we got a 1/2 inch one that I'll be starting to test, and I need a name for this, man. But also for the 1/8, I've been starting to test that today. This is the 1/8.
Wow, I love it! I'm so excited.
So this thing, I've been running it at 70% step over. I was able to go 3/8 of an inch deep at 180 inches per minute.
Wow.
That's through oak. So I'm still running the test because I did drive it to break point, which is what I want to do. So that's just getting all that stuff situated. So those are
like sorry, I have like a really funny like thing popping in my head about that 1/2 inch bit. It looks like something like the Terminator would carry, like just like obliterate like everything. That's what that looks like, does it not?
That's pretty badass. Then I've got a 1/2 inch compression.
Oh.
That we're going to be working on. So that's all in the pipeline. And just so you know, okay, we just released a 1/8" precision collet for the Makita, and we lost
Yes, I
Nate again,
saw that.
unfortunately. Yeah,
Dang
and
it.
I released it to the CNC Insiders Facebook group, and they always get first knowledge of it, right? I'll release it. I let them know ahead of time, and CNC Insiders always get a discount on first releases for about 2 or 3 days. And
Yeah.
so when this little bad boy beast comes out, if you're on the CNC Insiders Facebook group, you will be notified. You'll get that 15% discount. The 1/8" collet sold out immediately.
Really?
I
That's
had
incredible.
200 of them. Yeah, I had 200 of them. So, and once that sold out, I said, but that's it, right? The discount's gone, right? So
Yeah.
just so you know, if you want to have heads up when these things are released, right, you got to get on CNC Insiders. That's my email list. I give you tips. I give you some discounts that I don't make public on YouTube, right? And so link to get on the CNC Insiders is in the description of this video. And I'm going to release a pre-email about this. Let's start letting the insiders know about these things. So
That's really exciting.
yeah. All right, Nate, we got you back, brother. Oh, one more thing. The databases on the IDC Woodcraft website are going to be updated shortly. All right. So I will make an announcement like here live and through the insiders email list, because I'm going to be adding a few more bits to it. Okay. All right. So let's get on to the next one.
Holy smokes. We are Jillian's on it. We have our Julian's got 33 questions. So let's start. Let's bust them. Oh, hey, Carolyn, how are you, girl?
Yeah, Carolyn's one of our regulars. She's here all the time.
Yeah, Carolyn's awesome. It says, I was given a bunch of scrap wood, but have no idea what type it is. Is there a safe wood to pick when selecting a product type? I'd say, walnut, cherry. I'm going to put this out there. Don't use ash. I learned the hard way. Set my Makita on fire. Not my favorite wood. Probably going to stay away from that. Pine, birch, maple. I like working with hardwoods personally, so those are like my go-tos.
Whatever you're not allergic to.
That too. I had to learn that the hard way too.
Good point.
Rub it on your arm and see if there's a reaction, and if there's no reaction, it might be a safe wood for you to work with.
Yep. I did. I had to learn that the hard way. I was actually covered in like hives one day, and my husband was like, "What is the matter with you?" I'm like, "I think I'm allergic to the wood."
Yeah,
so,
Mark Lindsay, he's here, Nate. You know Mark Lindsay,
yeah.
right? So he's here in the feed. Hi, Mark, brother. He hates it when we do this. Oh, holy Mark.
The Holy Grail, the old wise grasshopper.
He was saying he was working with some leopard wood, and did he say it was or is like leopard wood?
He said he had to wear gloves.
Yeah, there's a wood he was allergic to. So there are some woods that we get allergic to. So that's a good point.
The other thing is too is you always want to make sure. You want to make sure that you, oh gosh darn it, don't use pressure treated wood. That's the other thing too. You don't want to use pressure treated wood because it can be really, really toxic. So be careful of anything that's pressure treated. Okay, so yes. Hi, Murph. How are you doing? Murph and I have been working on a couple of things in one of our CNC sessions. And yes, I will get you the passwords, so then that way you can check that out. I'll get that to you after the live. All right, who else we got?
R. Murphy. Okay, sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
I keep hitting the wrong one. My bad. Here we go.
Oh, hey, Brian. I always remember Brian because he's got a big old English lab, and I have an English lab too.
What's up there, Brian?
It says, was wondering on my projects, say wood and epoxy coasters when I'm done with a round over bit on edges and touch-up sanding. What is a good way to do a thin finish coat, brush, flood, or what?
So I would say this is one of those times where sometimes epoxy is not the best final finish. If you want something that's really thin, like you could probably get away with doing deep pour as a flood coat because it's so much thinner than tabletop epoxy. Like the viscosity is so much less, it will settle at a smaller thickness than tabletop epoxy does. I have done that in the past using Super Clear's 24-hour deep pour as a flood coat. The only thing I don't like about that is how long it takes to set up. So there's such a higher risk of a fly landing your finish. You know, and because it's so thin, you have nothing to take off. And then if you take it off, you got to finish it again anyway. So
it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where if you want something that's really, really thin, maybe like a sprayable clear coat is the better option than an epoxy coat. But if you have a dust room that you're doing epoxy work in, you could totally try the deep pour as a brush it on or a flood coat with the deep pour.
Yeah, the problem I always struggle with, and this is even like my own personal struggles with epoxy, because I do like those wine molds. I bought like the mold from like Crafted Elements, and it's like got like a curve, and then you know you can put your two wine glasses and then your wine bottle in the middle, and I'm like, okay, so if I pour epoxy over the top of this, it's going to seep through, and then I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm going to have to sand the bottom side, and then so you have this like ultra gloss on one side, and then the bottom is still like, you know what I mean? But you're going to still be sanding, so it's like, okay, do I gloss it and then have to clean the drips up afterwards and then sand the bottom until it's like really glossy, or do I just sand both sides and in all the crevices and get it like a really nice finish, and then just put like a Rubio's or some type of really nice, like I use buffing compound actually that you would use like on your car. I use that in my buffer. I actually did an Instagram reel on that where I just sanded it, and then I put the Meguiar's what do you want to say, finish on it, and then I used my buffer and I just buffed it out, and it was like glass. So, you know, I feel like it's a catch-22 with epoxy and coasters and small projects. I would much rather personally just buff them out, and just because then it's like done. You can just keep moving on to the next project, because otherwise you just get caught in this cycle of, like you said, sand and then try to fix it. Then you're sanding it off, and then you're just like spinning your wheels.
Yeah.
Okay. I got a question for both of you. What is the we'll go with Nate first, but it's the same question for both of you. What is the thing about epoxy that makes you really like to do it? What is, like with the CNC router, when you're watching the machine carve and you're like, oh man, that's so cool, and you get it off the machine and you have this project. What is it about epoxy in that way where you're going to the next level with your CNC?
For me, I think what's really attractive is the fact that like it can be hard to visualize mentally. Like, sure, you're going to take this logo and recreate this logo, but it's always a challenge when I first look at a logo and I'm like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to approach all of these colors? And then there's no science of this is, you know, with this logo, it's this, that, and there's the steps. It's like the way that I approach this logo might be different from the way both of you approach the same exact logo. So I think for me, it's at the end of it is the satisfaction is so high because you went into this and like you might have a rough idea of how you're going to do it, but there's no rules. Like there's no way to do it. Like there's 10 ways to skin a cat. And so like to look at a logo and go, all right, I think this is the best, most efficient way to do it. And then you do it and it comes out great. And it's like, let's do it again.
I love that. I love that answer because honestly, it is really satisfying to do it. for me, it's almost like being like a kid in a candy store. There's just so many different options to do things. Like, and now they have all these like really cool molds. And I mean, just I am such a creator and an artist at heart. I love the endless possibilities to do things like over here, my big logo, my big Rise and Shine logo. I am like dying to just buy some syringes and like go to town on that mandala and just like light it up and make it just like really pop. But of course, it's like, how many projects can one shop hold right now? So that may be like a winter project, maybe when I'm on winter break with my kids or something, I might tackle that. But I think it's just the creative freedoms, and then you can do translucent and you can do matte, or you can do the high gloss, or you can work with olive wood and you can incorporate it in there. I mean, there's just so many different things that you can do. I personally love adding the sparkle and the swirls, like when it's like peanut butter and then swirling it. That is probably like creme brulee or creme brulee.
How steep is the learning curve?
Ooh.
There's a lot of trial and error, I would say, by it. Like I started out with liquid glass and I really still like it. It's moderately priced, and I would start out with something small like some coasters, because you need to get a feel for like the thickness of the epoxy that you're going to be working with. And then I started with like really small coasters, and then I started adding so I would put the sparkle in, and like, okay, ooh, that's a little too much, like too much pigment. And then I started like adding other elements in, like I added like little florals, and I was like, I put those in there, and then I was like, I'd pull it out and be like, yay, it's gonna be perfect. And I'm like, oh crap, there's like a big old ugly bubble in the middle of it. So like you just kind of have to really start to experiment and find like what speaks to you, like Nate did with his projects. He started with his logo, probably, I'm going to assume.
Mm-hmm.
You did your logo at some point and said, okay, I think I can do this for maybe a few other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it comes down to the individual. Like CNC has its own learning curve, and then epoxy has its own learning curve. And I think comparing the two, epoxy has less of a learning curve. At least from my experience. I obviously didn't come from a CNC world. I had no background in CNC. So like when I took the jump to get into CNC, it was like, I guess I'm going to have to figure this out if I'm going to use this machine. And so, yeah, I think as long as you have the material to practice with, the learning curve's not super steep with epoxy, and tabletop's very forgiving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay. So one of the things, just so those who are watching it know, are interested in the epoxy, or you're playing with it, but you're not really sure how to do it, Nate has put together a course for you. And so talk a little bit about this course that you put together, Nate. And
yeah, I'm interested to know about your course too. So tell us about it.
Definitely. So a little bit ago, a few months ago, I'm obviously doing this full time, and the thought just kind of came to me, was like, I wish that when I had started doing this, there was something I could look at, right? Like somewhere I could learn. And I just kind of looked at all the mistakes that I had made along in the past. And, if there was like some resource I had, or, had the ability to go purchase, like it would have saved me a lot of headache. And it would have just been like, all right, here's the process. Now I just have to get used to using the material. And I got the process. Here's my process is here. I just got to get used to the material, and boom, I'm good. And so I was like, kind of played with the idea for a couple of weeks. Like, what if I just like made a course? And I was like, well, I mean, it is an art, but there is factors that are kind of sciencey with it, right? And
Yes.
So I figured I can teach like my TTPs, I can teach my procedures, I can teach people like just what I know and what I do. And if I had that information when I started, it would have been massively beneficial for me. So that's kind of what spurred the idea of like, how can I, of like bringing the course to life. And then obviously from a business standpoint, like vertical integration, or maybe vertical integration isn't the right terminology, but like a pivot, right? How can I generate income from a different stream? Like, well, I get a lot of satisfaction out of doing this. Like, so I feel like I could talk about this all night and like teach people how to do this and have a really good time talking about it with people and like telling people how I do this. So like, why don't I go and teach this now? And so yeah, that's really like how it all came about, was like, man, if I had this when I got started, it would have saved me so much time.
Right.
So much time.
And I really appreciate that philosophy, right? Because so many of us creators, we're diving into YouTube trying to figure out CNC routers, and then for those who move on to epoxy, now you got a whole new thing of how do I get this going, and then they're back in YouTube wasting a ton of time again, right? So now you've got a course that somebody's put together, which is Nate's. I have put a link for that course in the description of this video. So if that's something you're interested in, then it'll take you to his website and you can take a look. That's very reasonably priced. There's no reason why I shouldn't be in this. So I'm probably going to be signing up to your course as well. All right. Julian has racked up about 38 questions for us still.
Oh man, we haven't made any progress.
Well, I do have one more question about your course. So Nate, is it mostly like videos, or is it like kind of like book format, or like how is your course laid out?
That's a great question. So it's laid out in videos, and then each video, if it doesn't have it, it will have like a written description of everything that I go through in that video. And then what I'm also telling people is that like, when you buy the course, this was not an example. This was a test. Like, I wonder if people will buy this. And so I was like, I'm not going to like do research. I'm just going to put a course together and put it out there and see what happens. And so what I'm telling people is like, you're buying a baby course right now. Okay. And I obviously don't know everything, and I will never claim to know everything about epoxy, but I'm always striving to learn more. And as I learn more, that content is going to make its way into the course. And so when you buy the course, you're in the course. So anything that I add to the course, you then have access to. So as the course grows, and as my information and my skill grows over time, not only is the course going to grow, but obviously the price of the course is going to go up, because now there's more value involved. So,
jump in now.
So get in now, and then you're in. And so what I tell people is that, and also that, I am offering email support too. So like, if you go through the course and you're like, yeah, I have a question on this specific job, or like, somebody the other day was like, I feel like you didn't really address this, that, and the other topic very well. And I was like, great, I'm going to make a module explaining just those things that, you felt weren't in the course. So I'm very like fluid with things, and like, I want to make this the most comprehensive. I want to make this the most comprehensive epoxy inlay course that there is. And I'm obviously in the business of doing this. I'm not in the business of teaching this. And so I'm very new in the business of teaching this. So I'm going to miss stuff. But that's why I'm just kind of basically asking for grace. And like, if you're in the course, if you get in and you're like, oh, you didn't explain this at all, I feel lost in this aspect, send me an email, and in 2 or 3 weeks, there's going to be a module on it probably.
I love that. That's fantastic, because as educators, we all know we get a lot of emails, and you just opened yourself up to a lot of emails, my dear sweet friend.
That's okay.
So yeah, I love that. So that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Oh my gosh. Harold.
Yeah, Harold, look at you, man. 86-inch TV.
That's like,
man, we are huge.
That's like the size of like my thing back here. I don't really know how big that is.
On your face, Kate.
What's that?
He said he can see every pimple on your face.
I'm just kidding. Whew.
The link to Nate's course is in the description of the video. As I said before, Facebook up above and YouTube, it's in the description down below. Check it out. You guys really like doing this epoxy stuff. Obviously, Nate does. He does really, really well. If you ever see his stuff, right, you kind of already, as you watch what he does, you can tell he's an expert at it. He's been doing it for a very long time. So, all right.
All right, so we've got Bob Burks. Hello. How do you polish and finish the epoxy surface to get it glass smooth? I'll let you take this one, Nate.
That's a great question. So this is one of those things. This is one of those situations where I didn't realize that my background in automotive refinishing was going to actually come in handy in epoxy work because I spent years painting cars, prepping cars for paint, priming cars, cutting and buffing and polishing cars too. So yeah, essentially, and it's the process is very, very similar for epoxy as it is for like buffing a car. I typically don't do my finishes this way, but you would sand it up to 1,000, 2,000, or 3,000 grit. I have buffed out 1,500 grit scratches in the past. It takes a little bit of work, but you kind of got to know what you're doing. What I would do is if I, let's just say I had a coffee table, river table with a epoxy flood coat or whatever, and I want to just like make it look flawless. I would probably start with like 600 grit, and then I'd build up from 600 grit to 3,000 grit, and I'd probably start wet sanding at about 800 or 1,000 grit, and then everything from that point onward would be wet sanding with an orbital disc sander. You want to use an orbital disc sander because it's probably dang near impossible to buff out straight line scratches. So that would be like sanding with your hand. And circular scratches are kind of the same thing. So the orbital sander kind of makes like a bunch of small circles as it goes around a big circle. And those are able to be buffed out. So that's how I would handle it. And then you can use rubbing compound on a buffing machine, on like a wool buffer, and then finish it with like some type of finishing compound on an orbital buffer as well.
Yep.
Right. Cool.
Yep.
That in itself, buffing and polishing is an art, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
So like, don't do it on a live job first. Like, it's going to take it. That's one of those things that is definitely going to take practice. But the good thing with epoxy versus buffing a car is the millage, the thickness of the clear coat on a car is much, much, much thinner than like if you were to do a flood coat and then sand it and cut it and buff it. So you have a lot more grace from the material when you're buffing epoxy versus buffing like on a fender of a car or something.
Yeah, I agree. The wet sanding is really, really important. And the biggest thing that a lot of people don't consider when you get into epoxy is they think that it's like sanding a piece of wood. You're just going to go in there and do. Oh, it feels smooth. Okay. It's like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for like 10 minutes. And then it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for like 10 minutes. It's not something that you can just skip, and you have to work through the levels of sandpaper. So like when I'm doing big projects, like big epoxy projects, I literally will just get all of my sandpaper out and lay them from like one end of the table, a good length, and then they're all just laying there and then I flip them over when I'm done with it. So that way I know I'm for sure not missing any steps. But like Nate said, the orbital sander is absolutely key. I personally like my Milwaukee sander. I know that would probably be a question some of you would probably ask. I see a lot of people using the Festool. What do you use?
I use I think it's DeWalt. Yeah, I just use a DeWalt electric sander. But yeah. I personally don't think it really matters.
I don't think so either.
It is what it is. I have a nice 3M air-powered orbital sander, but my air compressor doesn't keep up with it too well. But the purpose of this is kind of something that I want to make sure it doesn't go over anyone's head, is that the purpose of stepping up from, like, if you start with 400 grit and then you go to 600 grit and then 800 and 1,000 and then 2 and then 3, the purpose of going through that process is because when you sand it with 400 grit you put 400 grit scratches in the material. And so the 600 grit takes out the 400 grit scratches. So
Yep.
A good way to do this is when you're sanding, have like a microfiber or a dry rag that after you're sanding, you can kind of wipe really quick to get the majority of the dust away and look at the sand scratches that are in the material. And then what you'll be able to see when you first hit it with like, 220 or 320 or 400, you'll be able to see those initial sand scratches. And then when you step up to that next, 600 grit and you start to sand, you'll start to see how the 600 grit scratches look a little bit finer than the 400 grit. And so you'll be able to tell where you still have 400 grit scratches to sand out and where they already are sanded out. A good tool that you can use is a material called guide coat. We use it in the automotive world a lot. Typically a black powder that you would, if I had this slab and I sand it with 400 grit, I'd dip on this black powder and it would make the whole thing black. And then I would start sanding with 600 grit. And when all the black is gone, then I know that all of the 400 grit scratches have been removed. And so then you could guide coat it again and hit it with 800. And so that's something we've used in the automotive world. I've never used it on wood. So don't go and put guide coat on wood without testing it first.
Don't go throw it on your big table.
Yeah. Right. What is that stuff called again? Julian, make note of this, please. So
it's called, I believe it's called 3M Guide Coat. GUIDE coat. And it's like a black powder.
Okay.
Again, I don't know if I'd put it on anything porous like wood, but if you want to practice on, like, do a flood coat on something and you want to practice buffing and polishing, you could totally use it on cured epoxy.
Yeah. All right. That would be neat.
Very good tips there. Wow.
You're getting all the
getting the scratches out of the that way. That's very cool. I
hope y'all are taking notes.
Yeah. Yeah. We got lots of questions hanging out here.
All right. So let's see. We've got one from Adam Tinkers. He says, as a newbie with epoxy, what would be a great first project to complete? Kind of like I suggested, maybe, I guess it just depends on what you want to do. If you're looking to do something like signage or something, if you're looking to V-carve and, do things like that, I'd say just do a simple, do your logo. Like you've got a great logo to try that out with. You can, V-carve or pocket out your letters and then, use, or you can flood, do like a white epoxy inside your wheel and then do the black and, experiment with your logo. That's a perfect first project. Maybe make yourself like some small coasters or, maybe a 12 by 12. So it's not too expansive. So you're not, if you mess something up, you're not out a ton of money. Maybe do like a 12 by 12 circle or, you put that CNC machine to work, baby. Let it do the work for you.
Being someone who has never done epoxy before, and I'm going to dive into it, I would do a project with one color of epoxy, just like a coaster or something, just to see what this stuff does. So I wouldn't even go to the level of trying to do a logo until I start to understand the feel of epoxy. I have learned my lesson through life many times. As many CNC creators that we like to do, we get ahead of ourselves in CNC. That's why, I've done it. Right, and that's why
I like to find the hardest thing to do and then do that first.
Yeah, and then find all the broken things. Why the hell did this happen? Then it takes you forever to figure that one out.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, 100%. I like to do things the hard way and then figure them out, but that's how we learn, So, yeah.
Yep.
Try something simple. All right. Hi, Louie. Let's see. What is the best way to prevent the epoxy from bleeding into the grain of the wood?
Good question.
So I'll give you my short and dirty answer. I use sanding sealer. I have a really great video on my YouTube channel over at Rise and Shine Wood Signs is my YouTube channel. And I did a birch, yep, there you go. I did a big birch flag with all like a very, very dark pigmented wood, and I use sanding sealer every single time. I actually tried to do a little bit of, I actually have 2 videos out. One, I made a huge mistake, and the second one is how I did it correctly. The first flag, I actually tried to carve it at about 1/4 inch deep, and I tried to do like a little bit of a flood coat with some epoxy, just like trying to seal the grain of the wood. And what happened is I wound up getting like more of a smoked epoxy instead of it being completely filled. So when I went back to what I originally knew, I filled it in. I just sealed everything with sanding sealer, let it dry for, 2-3 hours, and then I went back in and hit it with my 100% black pigment in this birch wood, and I did not have any bleeding whatsoever when I surfaced it. The key with epoxy and using your CNC and surfacing is making sure your epoxy is cured. That is like the #1 mistake I see with new beginners in epoxy is like you feel it, you're like, oh, it's done, it's cured. No, friend. No. You need to read the manufacturer's instruction and make sure that you're following the guidelines to make sure that it's really cured before you take a bit to it and you're applying that pressure and that heat and that speed. The other thing that can happen with your epoxy if it's not fully cured is it gets gummy and then it'll gum up your bits, clog up your dust collection. It just gets to be a whole mess. So sanding sealer is my go-to by far. So what do you think, Nate?
So I primarily use just water-based polyurethane, the Minwax water-based polyurethane. That seems to work really well with like plywood applications. If there's like, if I'm doing something on like hardwood or something that just like really soaks up, it's really, really porous, I'll like brush on a coat of clear epoxy first. And I have never, ever had a problem after brushing a coat of clear epoxy on with bleeding into the grain, unless the grain is like, it's like a really, really wide, like,
Yeah.
like stupid wide open grain type wood. And I just like rushed the sealer and like now, I mean, that's just user error, but yeah, polyurethane most times, but if it's a really porous wood, then I'll use epoxy. And if it is a really porous wood, sometimes I'll do a coat or 2 coats of poly, then a brush on a coat of clear epoxy, and then I'm right into whatever the inlay is.
I have a well, hang on. I have a quick question for you, Nate, about that. When you say brush it on, what are you using to brush it on?
One of these, just a foam brush.
Just a foam brush? Okay.
Yeah, yep. Just a foam brush, or even like these with gloves on, like just like pushing it in and around, depending on the application. If I've got like a real fine details, I've had bad experiences trying to seal something with epoxy when there's really fine details because the tabletop is as thick as it is, so it will just build up. And then if you have like really, really small crevices that you want to fill with epoxy, sometimes that seal coat will like fill it, and now you're kind of like SOL.
Yeah, that's what I ran into with my flags, is around the stars and stuff, and that's where I got the really smoked epoxy, and that's why I was like, forget it. I'm just going back to what I do, and went with a sanding sealer because it's thin, and it sealed it. But the lacquer is a really great way of doing that as well. I didn't think about that.
Now, you can't use oil-based polyurethane because epoxy there may be an epoxy out there, but from what I've seen, most of the epoxies that I've used, probably actually all the epoxies I've used, have been very explicit that the epoxy will not stick to an oil-based substrate. So like an oil-based stain or an oil-based polyurethane, it might stick right now, but in 4 or 5 months, it might not stick.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
All right. Yeah, cool. Okay, just so you all know, if you're interested in epoxy, I said this before, Nate has a course he's put out that will teach you, because as he said before, he was frustrated. He didn't have the step-by-step, and now he's put that together to solve a problem. So that's been linked down in the description of this video in YouTube and above in Facebook. All right, let's have, Mark, we're coming up to a question from the all famous Mark Lindsay, but not yet. Coming up.
All right. So it
Raven,
says a
Raven, Raven.
question from Raven. Hi, Raven. What kind of waste do you have?
So in the beginning, I used to have a lot of waste. I used to always mix up too much epoxy for like whatever I was pouring. And that's actually something that I do talk about in the course. There's a calculator you can use to find out how much epoxy you'll need at how, based on the length, width, and depth of cut. But not every logo is a perfect square that you're filling. So
Yeah.
I have used that when it makes sense to use that. Like, let's say I'm doing a big 36-inch circle, okay? And I'm going 0.15 deep. I'll calculate in that epoxy calculator, which you can find on most epoxy manufacturers' websites.
Yeah.
A 36 by 36 square at 0.15 deep, however I'm cutting deep, and see what that says. And then I'll make a guesstimate based on that. If that says I need 45 ounces of material. Well, I'm not doing a full square. I'm doing a 36-inch circle. So I'm not filling into the corners. So maybe I'll mix up like, I don't know, 38 ounces, 40 ounces, instead of what it says. So you can use a calculator, and that's how I've done it to figure out how much epoxy I need. And that will then help with limiting the waste. But I have an epoxy waterfall in my basement. In my epoxy room that I'm not really sure how I'm going to get out of there.
I love it.
So
that's
kind
some
of
crazy stuff us creators, we just do. We don't really think about the consequences of how it's going to move or get out of there. We just do.
It's like going down the table, then reaching down to the floor. I might be able to sell it for a couple $1 million as modern art or something.
Ooh, there you go. Pending that you can get it out of the house.
Yes,
Right.
in one piece.
Just call it, what do we call that? Like built-in equity.
Yes, there we go.
There you go. Well, it's a good excuse for some remodeling and expansion, right?
Exactly. There we go.
Yeah. All right. So we've got a question from Woodworking. How do you make the epoxy inlay shine on an outdoor sign with more epoxy or some type of varnish?
So I'll preface this answer with this. You do want to be careful about putting epoxy outside in the sun. I had a slab of epoxy leaning up against a pallet at like a 45-degree angle on one summer day. And by the end of the day, it was in the shape of a U.
Yeah, I was going to say it. I will say this, though. That is the really cool thing about epoxy. I actually saw a fella on, he had a big slab, just like you did, of epoxy, and he actually rounded it on like a 90-degree day for like 2 days in a row or something.
Ooh.
And he built it into the shape of like a U, and then he just used like a singular like steel piece for the table leg. I was like, that is so cool. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you also can look for brands that have some UV resistance, but you do want to keep, I don't know. I have a hard time with that because epoxy I won't say always, but more often than not will lean towards yellowing if it's in any type of direct sunlight.
Yeah. I've always strayed customers away from doing like big epoxy inlays outside. I have done epoxy outside, and what I would do in those situations is I would use a really good UV resistant clear coat. And that again may not be epoxy clear may not be the best finish for that type of scenario. So
do you put that on top of the epoxy?
Ooh,
I would put that on top of the epoxy. Yeah. And then the other side of it is like I've done like wood signs outside with epoxy inlays in them. And I've never really had any issues in that department because the wood is obviously acts as the backer for the epoxy. So as long as the epoxy doesn't fall out of the wood, which I don't imagine that would happen. But that's kind of another situation where I would be comfortable with it being outside. but I can definitely say with certainty I would not be comfortable with like a full epoxy inlay with no backer outside.
No.
Yeah. This is something I use on my signs. It's a Minwax brand, and it's actually called Helmsman, and it's actually it is for sunlight, rain, and moisture, and it does have a temperature. It's good for like temperature changes, so humidity, things like that. I use this on all of my outdoor signs. I actually think it's somewhere else in my shop right now, but I just did like a really big 3D carving, and it will have some epoxy in it, but it's in walnut, and the epoxy actually carved pretty deep into it. But I use this about 4 or 5 coats of it actually, and then people hang those signs out by their mailboxes, and I have not had one complaint about those yet. So this stuff actually comes in a variety of sheens. I use the clear satin just because I feel like it also gives it just like a really nice sheen. So, but you can get a matte, you can get a gloss, you can get whatever you want. And it does also come in a can. I will tell you, I think this can is around like between 21 and 25 bucks a piece. So it is, it's a little on the pricey side, but it's really good quality stuff. So
Okay. Yeah.
just
Remind
something
me,
I use.
Julian. And we'll get that linked in the video.
Yeah, there you go.
In the video. Okay. I love this question from Mark Lindsay. This is for you, Nate.
Oh,
Ooh.
any regrets about leaving your day job? Boy, I cannot talk tonight.
What a great question. 100 million% no. I mean, it was the best decision.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic.
Like, all right, so I have 4 kids, okay? So like it's crazy around here. The fact that I can at any point in time say, "Hold on, my family needs me." Dude, like you can't beat that. And additionally, to be able to go and say, I'm done for the day. I'm going to go do thus and such because I can.
Yes.
Dude, no way, man. Not one single regret. The only regret is that I wish I did it sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
I
very, very rewarding. I have 4 kids too, Nate. 2 of mine are older, a little bit more grown. But I still have 2 teenagers here at the house, and they're always, if you know teenagers, they are always making plans, no ride, no money, no nothing, but they got you. And sometimes it's fun to just say yes sometimes. And yes, I've had a hard day too. Let's just get out of here. Let's just go do some putt-putt golf or watch a movie or whatever it is. Just hang out in the house with them. It's very rewarding, and those are years and time you will never get back. So I love your perspective on that.
The work will always be here.
Yep.
There's a saying out there. Thank you, Mark, by the way, for asking that. And the saying is, you work to play or you play to work, right? And so entrepreneurs who dive into their stuff and they work really hard at it, they're working so that they can play. To switch this around, it's those who work hard have life easy. Those who live life easy have life hard, right? And it's if we're going to dive into a business and make it successful, we have to work really, really hard at it. But the long game delivers the freedom, right? But we have to work. We have to sacrifice some things. We have to sacrifice the video games and sometimes family and stuff like that. But you put yourself in a position where you have that liberty, like what Nate just said. It's an amazing, amazing feeling. And we all go through that. Why am I doing this 9 to 5 stuff? You know, we all are like going, you're selling your time. And we only have so much time.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, you're trading in the 9 to 5, but being an entrepreneur, you're also always on the hustle.
Yes.
Your mind, I mean, you go to work, you do your job at work, and you come home and you shut your computer off and you're like, yeah, your mind's still got a few things to the next day, but it's not like us. It's like Garrett's shop is there. My shop is right next to my house. Nate's looks like his shop is probably relatively close to his house, or in his, in his garage or wherever. But it's like we are always on the hustle of content creation. What is the next project, or how are we gonna, because we are on, you always have to be, you just have to be your biggest advocate, and you have to market yourself. Otherwise, nobody's going to know about you. And so entrepreneurs are just, I feel like, for the ones who truly make it, are just a different breed of people, because we have struggled. Like we've ridden the struggle bus for days and years to get where we're going. And so it is 110% a sacrifice, on
There's
all
there's
levels.
a good quote from Andy Frisella that I will always remember, and he said, he's big in the fitness industry, so that name may not mean anything if you're not deep in the fitness industry, but he said, life is hard. No matter what you do, life is hard. So do you want to be broke and have a hard life, or do you want to be financially successful and have a hard life? Because I'd rather be financially successful and have a hard life than be broke and have a hard life. So it's like, no matter what, life is hard. It's just you pick your hard. And so
you picked your hard. I love it.
Like easy choice at that point.
Yep. We either work for our own results or we work for someone else's results.
Whew. Said a mouthful there, brother. All right, so we've got 3D CNC. What kind of squeeze bottles do you use, if you do?
Good question. I don't use squeeze bottles. If I need to squeeze epoxy out of something, it's a syringe. I've never been in a situation where I'm using a syringe and go, man, I wish I had a squeeze bottle. I've only been in a situation where I'm using a syringe and go, man, I wish I had a big syringe. Or why am I doing this? I could just pour it out of the cup.
Yeah. What kind of cups do you use, out of curiosity? Because I've used, like when you're trying to do delicate little areas, and I've thought, oh, well, I'll put it like in a little, like Dixie cup, like, like the ones you keep by your bathroom sink or something. It reminds me of my grandma's house. But anyway, I've tried to put it in that, and then what happens is the epoxy just like comes out too fast, and then it runs down the side of the cup. I've tried about anything and everything. Do you have like a good syringe that you like to use?
I use syringes off Amazon. I think it's Bstean, Bstean is the brand. Those are the syringes that I like to use.
Right.
Like I think a 20 mil and a 10 mil are the two that I pretty much stick with. And then the TCP Global brand of the mixing cup that I use, and I usually I have 32-ounce cups, 16-ounce cups, and then today I just ordered some 10-ounce cups for some smaller stuff.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Okay, I will look into those, because I know a lot of people just use, you can buy them at Lowe's, but sometimes those cups get expensive. They're like $3-4, and I know I get a ton of questions about how do you clean them. People always want to know, can I clean them and reuse them?
Yeah.
Do you clean them and reuse them, or do you just use them and toss them?
People always ask me about the syringes. Like, do you clean your syringes? No, never. Like, I don't want that headache. Like, I'll throw that thing away instantly. Cups, though, on the other hand, I do clean every time. I will use a cup 100 times before I throw it away. I actually typically will use a cup until I crack it while I'm trying to clean it, and then it gets thrown away. But yeah, just 90, 91 or 92% or higher isopropyl alcohol, and like dump a little bit of that in the cup, take a rag, and like it's beautiful. You can keep them, and you can keep them clean for fairly long too. And I mean, I know that might seem like some people like, just throw it away and use a new cup, but like when you do the math, it's like
when you're doing this every day for your gig, that adds up.
Yeah, you gotta save money where you can, and like, why waste? It's gonna get thrown away anyway. Like, It's probably gonna end up in a landfill too, especially because it's caked with epoxy. So like, I might as well use it as much as I can before it gets to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All
All
right. So
right.
Garrett, what kind of questions we got left?
Well, we got 39 of them left.
I
Just so
know.
we know, we are now past the hour and a half mark, and so we'll go on for about another 10 minutes, maybe 15. We got a lot of questions, but just to rehash, Nate, as you can tell, knows his stuff when it comes to this epoxy stuff, and he has put a course together. So if you are ready to up your game to the epoxy level, the link to his course is down below in the description of the video, or if you're in Facebook, it's up above. All right, so let's try to burn through these things. We got two
All right.
Elm builds. What's going on?
Hey, friends. How deep do you typically carve to create your inlays?
Great
So I think,
question.
yeah.
I think we touched on this, but typically 0.15. If I'm doing what I call a background inlay, where you have a big background color and then elements within that color, I will typically do that background color at 1/4 inch so that I have plenty of space to take material off to resurface that. So between 0.15 and 0.25, I rarely, if ever, have gone deeper than that.
Yep.
All
All
right.
right. Who's next?
Bob.
Hey, Bob, how do you determine the amount of epoxy to mix for a particular job? I think we kind of covered this with using the epoxy calculator.
Yeah. And then aside from that, it's just practice. Like being able to look at a logo or an area that you've carved out and go, and I literally will do this. I will look at the logo, I will hold the cup, and I will go, I think that's about 8 ounces. And then I'll mix 8 ounces. And like sometimes I'm spot on, sometimes I need to mix a little bit more, and sometimes I have some extra. It's just
There's no
practice.
good, perfect way to do it. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I do.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't
It's
know if
hilarious.
I don't know if the Vectric software has an area calculator, the dimension aspect of it, but I'll look into that and see, because it's got some dimension tools. But Mark Lindsay can answer that, but I think that's not quite their level. Mark, throw in the comments if you can calculate a cut area in the Vectric software, and Julian will find that, and then she'll wave to us and say, "We got Mark's question. We got an answer to it."
I actually think Mark had to take off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think he had to record a podcast tonight.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay.
yeah. All
Mark
right.
Keller.
So, hey, Mark, how deep do you usually make your logos?
Yeah,
So,
same kind of thing. It's typically 0.15 deep. If I'm like V carving an area that maybe is not, it doesn't go 0.15, just because the vector lines are so close, and with a 90-degree V bit, maybe it only goes 0.08. I've found that if I'm doing an epoxy inlay and I have to cut like 0.02, 0.03 maybe is like a V carve depth, that will work better with filling that with black paint or whatever color paint instead of epoxy. Or you could use, I primarily stick with a 90-degree V bit because I'm doing such large format jobs. But if you're doing something really small and detailed, you could use like a 15-degree V bit, which would give that epoxy more depth. So that's where your different V bits are going to come into play based on the size of the logo, right? Like I said, I typically do large format stuff, so I primarily stick with a 90-degree V bit. But if I was doing like a small cutting board and the logo is this big and there was a bunch of intricate stuff in it, I might use a 30 or a 15-degree V bit,
yep.
which carving deeper is going to give the epoxy more depth when you go to surface it off the top. If you try and do, very, very shallow with a 90-degree V bit, you're not going to have much depth of the epoxy there. But obviously, you use a 60 or 30-degree V bit, it's going to give more depth to that same carve, which is going to give the epoxy more depth to itself, if that makes sense.
Yep. It does for me. I actually did a cutting board like that, and I did that exact mistake. So I cut it with a 60-degree, and I really probably should have used, I should have actually gone deeper. I think I carved it at like 0.05. I wish I had gone down a little bit deeper. because when I went to surface it off, I had actually poured too much epoxy in this instance, and so it was covered. And then when I went to surface it off, I had to go so deep to surface it, and it wound up making the epoxy look really faint. So making sure that you're like not just over pouring to just, oh, well, I'll just wipe it off, because what happens is sometimes when you surface it off, it winds up being a mute point either way, because you've literally surfaced all of your epoxy off because the V-carve was not deep enough. So the syringes are a great solution to that, just to save some people some time, money, material, and then, you know, do what Nate said, make sure that you're carving deep enough and wide enough.
All right, very cool. What's the minimum depth from Ron? What's the minimum depth for epoxy to stay put for either one of you guys?
1/8 of an inch. I mean, that's typically, I mean, you got to think about how thin 1/8 of an inch is. It's kind of like a really thin flood coat on a coaster, or, I mean, most flood coats are 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, just depending on the look that you want. So
as long as the table's flat, once it levels out to where it wants to level out, it'll stay put.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Ida asked a question. Has Mark ever done a video on epoxy? He ran through a series of videos as he made his pirate thing, but I don't think he has a walkthrough video for you. So
yeah.
But Nate's got a course that'll teach you all of it. So
it's like
everything else. I mean,
I think there may be a handful of videos on my YouTube channel too.
YouTube channel is Executive Fit, right?
Is Executive Fit, yeah. And it just kind of walks through the, like, it would be like, this is what I did here and this is what I did here. Not necessarily super in depth, but I mean, still something that, you know, people could take away from.
Okay, yeah, his YouTube channel is linked down in the description of the YouTube version of this live feed. It's not in the Facebook version. All right.
There we go. All right, so we've got woodworking. What type of bit do you use for the inlay, end mills or V-bits?
That's a great question. I like to use end mills as much as possible, because when you make a pocket with an end mill, right, you have the material and it cuts straight down, and then you have your pocket and it's straight up, and you're basically cutting, you know, the walls of your pocket are vertical, right? So as I surface the material off, my shape is going to stay exactly the same. If I cut a 4-inch a square that's 4 inches and I go 1/4 inch deep and I surface off 1/8 of an inch of that, it's still a 4-inch square, right? Because it cuts straight down into the material. But when you use a V-bit, if I were to cut a 4-inch square with a V-bit, it's 4 inches at the surface, at the top of my material. So if I cut a 1/4 inch deep with a 90-degree V-bit, let's say, and I surface 1/8 inch off the top of it, I don't know what the math is, but it's not a 4-inch square now, because a V-bit is at an angle. And so if my 4-inch mark is here, from this point to this point, okay, then as I surface down, as I take material off the top, that's going to make the size of the shape smaller and smaller, to where if you go almost all the way down, you're left with almost nothing, versus an end mill where you could go almost all the way down and the shape is still the exact same shape as when you started at the top of the material. It's kind of hard to explain this with my hands, but the takeaway should be, I think, use end mills as much as possible and only use V-bits when absolutely necessary to achieve details that you can't achieve with end mills. Or let's say the only way to achieve a detail with an end mill would be to use a 16th or a 32nd bit, and it would just take an absurdly long amount of time to do this. That's when a V-bit makes sense.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that.
All right. Okay, we'll do one more, and then we'll have to check out one more epoxy question, because we are now hour 45 minutes into this, and this is about the overrun that we normally do, but we do have 35 questions sitting out there, so we'll have to get Nate back on board here. Final wrap up before we do one more question. Again, Nate has put a course together for epoxy. I guess it's the only one out there, right? So if you want to
Yeah, I
start
think
learning,
so.
and I asked them before, what is the joy in epoxy? And for Nate, he said it's the idea of taking something and not knowing quite how he's going to do it, and then figuring out, the different colors and what have you. And Kate, you kind of said just the creative side of it. It's it's got its
Yeah.
its own element outside of CNC router creating. So
Yeah.
I have linked his course down below in the description of this YouTube video. All right, so let's get let's see what this is. Kind of similar to the other question we had. How do you figure out how much?
I think there's a really great question. I'm actually going to pop that one out. I'm going to pop this one in because I really feel like this is a really good question to finish up the evening with, because everybody wants to know what every other good creator that's established that's working with epoxy, what are you using? That is like the $1 million question that everybody wants to know. So tell us your secrets, sir.
All right. So I primarily right now use Super Clear. I just experimented today with Epodex. I really like it. I really like Epodex because of the price point, number one. It's comparable to what I'm already using, so I could make a switch or implement it and not have to really change pricing around. And what I like about Epodex is how thin it is. It is a very, very thin. The viscosity is very low in comparison to Super Clear. Now, the downside to that is using it as a top coat or a finish coat. It's not going to build up as thick. There's particular parts of the procedures that I do where I will definitely continue to use Super Clear, but I could absolutely see the benefit of using Epodex. I didn't even have to torch this stuff to get the bubbles. It was so thin. It was really phenomenal. So I'm definitely going to continue to use Epodex, and I think that's something I'm going to be adding into the course as well, like a little comparison module of like what I've used and what I like. The other epoxy that I really like is MAS, MAS, their LV epoxy. The reason that I like the LV epoxy is because you can buy different hardeners for it. So you can buy a fast, medium, or slow hardener to mix with the LV resin. And the reason I like that is because just today, it was this morning, I was behind on a job because of installation that went sideways, and I wanted to have the epoxy in it yesterday. Didn't get around to doing it. So this morning I did the epoxy in it with the MAS and the fast hardener. And what that allowed me to do is then in 2 hours, make a whole bunch of dust in the shop and not worry about that piece that's sitting on the table. So you can use this fast curing epoxy. I've done like 2-3 colors in a day using this stuff. It's
wow, that's awesome.
Nuts. It's absolutely nuts, but it's very, very temperamental because you torch it for like a millisecond too long and it's gone, and it'll just bubble up on you and overreact, and then you're gonna have to like clean it out or cut it out and start over again. So the MAS LV epoxy with the fast hardener is really nice for that. Again, they have the medium hardener, which is comparable to the cure time of like Super Clear at like 16 to 24 hours. And then they have the slow hardener, which is comparable to like a deep pour epoxy, where it just takes a lot longer to cure. And that would come in handy really well if you wanted to do like a color gradient, where you want to let the epoxy like mix together at the gradient, at the edge of where the black is meeting the red, and you want it to like really, really blend in together well over a longer period of time. If the epoxy is curing really fast, it's not going to have a lot of time to move. At a certain point, it's going to gel up, it's going to stop moving, and then you're stuck with the way that it looks as it continues to cure. But with the slow hardener, you can allow it to like blend together and really mix really well before it sets up and stops moving. So the MAS LV with the different hardeners is my favorite. It's not a regular one that I use. I kind of just keep it in my back pocket for like situations like this morning where it was like, oh, I got to get this epoxy done like really quick. But
Yeah.
yeah, primarily super clear. I'm starting to implement the Epodex. I'm a big fan of the Epodex so far. I've only done it on one job or two jobs, and but just it'll take me a little bit to get used to that viscosity because it is a very thin epoxy. But yeah,
So
primarily
quick question
Epodex
on
and-
the Epodex and the mass is what are your thicknesses?
Both of those thicknesses in terms of like a flood coat. I think
Just
Epodex.
anything in general. Like if you were to pour for one of your signs, like
If I was doing like a flood coat on top, like a clear coat of the Epodex, I think they say that it self levels at a 1/16 of an inch, so it is very
okay.
thin. And I would imagine mass would be the same because it is
Okay.
very thin as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So just
All
for the
right.
record, I've got some kind of handy right here. So this is
That's
what the
it.
super clear epoxy looks like. The reason a lot of people really like the super clear is it is actually food safe. So if you're doing any type of cutting boards, I've done a lot of cutting boards where I will do a design on the front, still with the juice groove, so it still looks like a legit cutting board. But of course, as you know, you don't want to cut on epoxy because if you use a knife on it and cut it, it is glass. So you can flip over the cutting board and still have a traditional cutting board, to use, but you can still incorporate this food grade epoxy because people just like knowing that it's food grade safe. If it's going to be around your food, it's food safe. So you can easily say that. But
All right. Very, very cool. This has been a very educational evening.
yes,
So this
absolutely.
this epoxy, I will get links for that and put it in the description of this video or podcast. Kate has some of the stuff on her website as well, womenwhocnc.com. So if you
Yep.
want to get it, you can do her a favor and get it through her. She'll get a little bit of credit for it as an affiliate. So
Yep.
if you decide to buy some of this epoxy, head over to her website, womenwhocnc.com, and get it from there. Nate, thank you very much. We can tell you're extremely passionate about what you do and want to share your knowledge.
Yes.
You got a big passion for that, just like us. So got another educator on our hands.
Right on.
I love
Yeah,
it.
we'll have to bring you back on because we're still sitting on 30 some odd questions. So
I'd
we'll
love
have
to. That'd be great.
we'll have to get you back on as a special guest in the near future.
Absolutely.
But we are going to check out because 4 of us have to go. There's 3 showing here, and there's 1 in the background going, I gotta pee, I gotta pee. No, she's not saying that.
She's probably sitting there going, I'm going to strangle you.
Hello. All right.
Luckily, you can't see her. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Okay. Brothers, seeing tears. It's been a great evening, very educational. Next Wednesday, same time, 8 p.m. We'll get back to the CNC router questions, and we'll get Nate back on here again. We apologize for the questions that we weren't able to answer. Kate, you want to give your farewells, and Nate, give your farewells?
Yeah. Ladies, don't forget about the Facebook group, Women Who CNC. And again, like Garrett mentioned, if you've got any questions about what actual products I use, they are over on the Women Who CNC website. It's under the tab links and discounts. You can go there. You can scroll through all the products I use on all of my projects. So get in there, help yourself. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email directly from that website. And I'm really happy to have Nate on here. I think this was fantastic. I think there's a ton of interest in epoxy work. So I'm so proud of all of our community for showing up for Nate and showing him the love and just getting to know more about this beautiful art. So thank you all for showing up for Nate. It means a lot.
All right, Nate, you give the final farewell and we will check out.
All right. Well, again, thanks for having me on. This was really, really cool. I've done a few podcasts, but this has been the most fun
Yay.
type of podcast. I don't know if you can call this podcast, but this has been the most fun that I've done. And
Good.
yeah, everybody that was watching, thank you. If we didn't get to your questions, sorry. Send me a message, send an email, and hopefully we'll get back on here in a couple weeks or so and do it again.
Yep,
All right.
absolutely. I love it.
And with that, hasta la vista, everybody, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
See you next Wednesday.